Thank you, Michelle. Also, today I want to highlight it's our first Sunday of the month, and every first Sunday of the month I want to highlight Kingdom Builders. And if you're not involved in Kingdom Builders, we want you to be. We want everybody to be part of this. This is above and beyond giving, above and beyond our regular giving, to expansion of God's kingdom. We have global missions, local church expansion, future Christian leaders, and this is the way we raise support to send outside for missions, for local projects that we have, to help other ministries, and to build the body of Christ. And so just wanted you to know I printed some more of these and put them in the back at the table if you'd like to pick one up. If you don't have one, pick one up. And every day I pray through the different ministries that we support, the different ministries throughout the world, some here in Minnesota, some here right here in Bemidji. And we have an opportunity to pray for them. And so on top of giving towards it, I think we need to be praying for the leaders and for the ministries that we support, and knowing that God can do great and mighty things. So today I'm going to talk to you and continue on our series in 1 Samuel, and I get to share with you one of the stories that's my probably top 5 stories in the Bible. And when I told my preaching professor in 1988 that I wanted to preach out of it, he said it wasn't good enough to preach out of it. Well, he didn't say it that way. He said it was too short, and it didn't have enough. But I still preached out of it. So, because it was such my favorite story, and I did see, there's some expansion that needed to be done, but it's one of my favorite stories. But it's talking about the Lord's all-encompassing power. The fact that the Lord has all-encompassing power. And when you think this, last week we just had another presidential debate. We've got a presidential election coming forward. We've got all kinds of Senate elections. We've got all kinds of things going on. And a lot of this has to do with people wanting power, people wanting to wield power. And once they get power, they want to hold on to it. It's something that people strive for. Pastor Troy was talking about the love of money is the root of all evil. I would say the love of power is right with it. That love of, I have the power over people. I say it and people do it. I have that kind of power, And so that's something that people are looking for. But we need to understand that we serve the all-powerful God. The all-powerful God that He, first of all, raised Christ from the dead, never been done, created everything, take credit for that. He builds and He destroys, He lifts up and He tears down. And the greatest thing, I think, that He's done in all of our lives that are Christians is that He has saved us. He has restored brokenness. You think about everybody who is here. And I always think about that when somebody comes new to a church. And they're thinking to themselves, well, look at these people. They have never experienced anything in their life. And then you sit down with that person, you're like, oh my goodness. Okay? God has done great and mighty things. No matter what your backstory is, He has done that. But He's the ultimate judge against sin. He uses His power for His people. I mean, you go back and you look at Exodus. You look at the whole Exodus story. Pharaoh, the most powerful leader around, said, I am the most powerful leader. And God kind of looked at him and go, yeah, you're in for it now. How about 10 plagues that go after every one of your gods? You realize those 10 plagues lined up with the Egyptian gods. Just said, you like that one? How about that plague? Oh, that one? Here's another plague for you. You think you have any control? And then as they're leaving, of course, the Red Sea is parted. And then it drowns Pharaoh's army. The concept and the water from the rock as they're going through the desert and the fact that their clothes never wear out. We serve a mighty God. He gives us guidance and direction. And He gives peace for those that are with Him, but we need to understand also that God is the righteous judge, and He uses His power for judgment. He uses His power, and this can be a very difficult thing, because a lot of times people say, as you're a pastor, you're in a church, we don't want to hear about judgment. You know what happens when we don't let God understand God as a judge? People become a judge. People become their own judges. Well, you know what? There's no God up there who's going to take care of anything, so I better do it. I better take care of this, or I better put this into place, instead of realizing that God is the righteous judge. There is no one that is outside of him. But for all of us who are close to him, that are called by his name and look to do his will, he is the great God that defends us against enemies. The end of the Lord's Prayer is, deliver us from evil or the evil one. We're not sure exactly if that's evil or evil one. Doesn't matter. But it's the fact that who can protect us from evil? And that is God. Because when any force comes against us, it fights us. So now, I'm going to talk to you about what's called the Ark narrative. And for most people, when they think of the Ark of the Covenant, they think, of course, there was a movie that was done in the 80s. It was very popular. And that's really brought the attention to a lot of people of, hey, there's an Ark of the Covenant, and this is kind of cool and all that. So, but we're going to talk about the Ark narrative. Now, the problem with this is the story is 4 chapters long. And so we're really going to be pushing it to get out of here by night. I'm just letting you know right now. I went through the whole thing, and I'm like, well, I got to capture the high points here. Because to get the whole concept, you need to see this whole thing. And so first of all, I think what we need to see from this whole narrative is God's power is not orchestrated by human beings. There are people who think that they can do something and make God do something. Or God is an object that can be used like some kind of an instrument, whether we wear a cross around our neck thinking that that'll protect us. We use some kind of we do something, or we use some kind of an object thinking that that will be on our behalf. So if you look at the beginning of chapter 4 in 1 Samuel, and it says that the Israelites are going to go out, and so I'm going to summarize a lot here. They're going to go to battle against the Philistines, and they're going to encamp at Ebenezer. Remember that word, Ebenezer. And the Philistines encamped at Aphek. And so basically, the biggest thing you need to know are the Philistines are the big bad boys. All right? The story of Samson, very huge story. They're the ones who tricked Samson into telling him about what his weakness was, and they took him down, and they said that, look, we're more powerful than you, we got you. They were always terrorizing the children of Israel. They were taking their space. They're always there. And so what's going to happen is they're going to encamp, and there's going to be a fight. And the fight is going to happen. The Philistines are going to come there. The Israelites are going to come there. And basically the Philistines are going to defeat them. 4,000 are going to be killed. And the people came to the elders and said, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? And their answer is, let's go get our good luck charm. And he said, no. They said, go get the Ark of the Covenant. No, they're saying, let's go get our good luck charm. They're not doing this, so they're seeking after God. They didn't say, let's go seek after God and see what he wants us to do. Because the Ark of the Covenant, it did go around Jericho. It did go in front of the battles that took place, but it was under the direction of God that it was doing that. It was not something to be attempted to say, oh, the enemy's coming, let's throw the ark at them. That was not the issue. So they brought the ark there. And you can tell they were doing it wrong by the simple fact that if you look at who came with the ark, is the sons of Eli. And they came with them. And so they showed up there, Hophni and Phinehas, and they show up with the ark. And what have we learned about them? They're under judgment for what they were doing against God. So they show up with the ark saying, hey, we're still priests. Hey, we still got the Ark of the Covenant. So the people yell, just like they did around Jericho. Guess what happened when they yelled when they were around Jericho when they were following God? The walls of Jericho fell down. Guess what happened when you're not following God and you've got a corrupt priest and you use the Ark as a good luck piece? You fall down. And so basically, they were routed. The Philistines were afraid when they heard the scream because they'd heard the stories. It's always interesting. You see this in is the Philistines were afraid in verse 7, for they said, a God is coming to the camp. Who can deliver us from these mighty gods? It says in verse 8, these are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. So they were like, hey, if these guys are really on fire with God, we're in trouble. But since this wasn't God's will, since they weren't doing this, they decide we better fight as hard as we can against the people of Israel. So instead of it having the effect of pushing back the Israelites, it causes them to be killed by the Philistines. And so they had fear and they had bravery that came out of this. And it says, verse 10, so the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled, every man to his home. And there was a very great slaughter for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel. And the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Because what God was saying is, I am the powerful God that judges, and my judgment first comes on the people of God that should have known better. The people of God that should have known better. Hophni and Phinehas are not, I mean, we always there's kind of this thing right now we have kind of with TV evangelists. I think there's kind of an assumption that we've had stories, let's be honest, okay? And things like that. But with Hophni and Phinehas, you're like, really? You guys are pastors? I've told a few people this story, but I met somebody from my high school recently who hadn't seen me since high school. And I said, and they asked what I do for a living. I said, a pastor. And they go, well, I didn't see that coming. And my first response was, what did I do in high school? That was so bad. But anyways, but the whole concept here is we think that the Philistines, they shouted and they thought they had it, but God took judgment first against the people that had violated his covenant. The people that were sleeping with the attendants in the temple. God said, yeah, I'm here to judge. Guess who I'm here to judge? The people that I prophesied that I would judge. And so then what happens, starting with verse 12, is Eli is sitting at his seat, and he is watching it. I find this interesting. He's at the road watching, but it says that he's blind. But, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet. So if I get it, I'll tell you in a future sermon. But anyways, he's there waiting for word from what's going on. And he heard the outcry from the city because the people are screaming, what's going on, what's going on? We think what happened is the Philistines kept going and completely trashed Shiloh. In fact, archaeologists came back and they dug up the city and they said a great fire destroyed it about this time. So Eli's sitting there. And he said, this person comes to him, and the person comes to him with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head, it says in verse 12. And for us, we're like, so? If you are mourning in the Old Testament, you put ashes on your head and you tear your clothes. This is a sign of mourning. The author is doing that to let us know that this is a time of mourning. And so when Eli heard this, he said, the bad news. He said that Israel had fled before the Philistines, and there was great defeat. Your two sons are also dead, and the ark has been captured. As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, it says in verse 18. His neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged for 40 years. Now, the word heavy is an interesting word here in Hebrew. It means three things at once. It means somebody that has a lot of prestige. It also means somebody who has the concept of heavy in the sense of, what am I trying to say? Too much weight, all right? And then the other one would be burdensome, okay, that they're a burden. And all of these things take place because he's a man of great prestige. He's from the line of Aaron. He's supposed to be the great leader. He's heavy. Heavy also the fact that he kept eating the fat out of the sacrifice that he wasn't supposed to eat. So he was heavy. Needed to mix in a salad every once in a while. But he's also a burden to his people because he caused this great damage was done. And this is what's so hard is other people are hurt by his sin. Think of the thousands of people that were put into captivity, the thousands of foot soldiers that were killed because he as a leader decided to turn his back on God, that he was a burden. And so here he is doing that. And now we have the story of his wife Phinehas. The wife of Phinehas, his daughter-in-law, was about to give birth. It says in verse 19, and when she heard that the ark of God was captured and that her husband and her father-in-law were dead, she bowed down to give birth. So early birth pains came upon her. And when she was dying, the women looked at her and said, hey, everything stinks. We agree. But the greatest thing that could happen to a woman at this time period was to have a child. We talked about that with Hannah earlier, where Hannah, because she couldn't have children, it was a big curse to her because that was a great thing for her. They said, hey, guess what? You have a son. But she wouldn't even pay attention because she named the child Ichabod. And the glory has departed from Israel, she said, because the ark of the God has been captured and because of her father-in-law and husband. And then she said, the glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured. Her last words as she's dying is Ichabod. Now, as a little side study, I looked up people named Ichabod. Okay? There's a few in literature, but there are real people with this name. And I thought to myself, why? That's all. The name means the glory of God has departed. So you have a little child and you're like, oh, the glory of God has departed. That sounds wonderful. I don't know. I looked it up though. There was a guy who was a senator. There was a guy. Ichabod Crane is probably the one that is known in literature. But it's kind of a scary, but the word that always gets me about this story also is Ebenezer. Because when you say Ebenezer, the first people think of Scrooge. But we're going to find out that good. Ichabod, no. Ebenezer, yes. And so here the whole dynasty had left. She uses the word Ichabod, which is the same word that we talked about for heavy. It's a derivation of that word. So that the honor, the weight, and the burden of the dynasty is gone. Eli is gone. His dynasty is gone. His children are gone. His grandson is named Ichabod. The Ark of the Covenant has left. And if you're in Israel, everything is going poorly. And so you think to yourself, well, that's an uplifting story. And so we saw that there's a sense of judgment that went upon the people of Israel at this time. But we need to understand that the Philistines need to be dealt with also. The Philistines are the biggest, baddest ones around. Okay? Anybody here who grew up in my time period before the end of the Cold War knew that we were always fighting against the big, bad Russians, the evil empire. Okay? I remember watching the movie War Games, and they showed all the missiles flying in, if you remember that movie. And we saw that Grand Forks was going to be hit. And so our plan was, because we had seen other movies where you were going to die of radiation poisoning, was just to drive to Grand Forks and get it over with quick. So that was our plan. Or we were going to become like Red Dawn. Never mind, I'm getting into too much of my... But anyways, the whole thing of, we had plans though. But there was always that big evil empire. So the Philistines are thinking they're really tough. In fact, earlier, let me just start with this. First of all, when the Philistines captured the Ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. This is in verse 5, or chapter 5. Then the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon and set it up there besides Dagon. Now, who's Dagon? Dagon is the leader, is the military god, the big bad god of the Philistines. He's so tough to them. In fact, in Judges 16:23, when they took Samson, they said, now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and rejoiced. And they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. In other words, they gave credit to Dagon. And you know what? They're giving credit to Dagon again. Look at our God, Dagon, took their God out. You see, at this time period, there was a real concept in battle. It wasn't just like who had the most missiles or who had the most guns. well, they didn't have any of those things. Who had the most spears and shields and things like that? It was which god was on which side. And they're looking at it and they said, we're going to make your God be the servant of our God. We're going to put him in his house. We're going to make your God sit in our God's house and basically have to be his servant for life. But God didn't like that plan. And this is one of my favorites. Verse 3. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, this is an important thing. If you're a Hebrew person reading this, the first morning light is the first prayer that you're supposed to give to God, Yahweh, the holy God. And they're like, at the time of holy prayer, when we're all supposed to bow down in front of God, guess what God did with little old Dagon? He said, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face downward on the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. Okay, so you're supposed to be worshiping God at the morning light. So what does God do with Dagon? It's about time you need to worship, pal. I love that story. Just like he puts him in a worship position in front of him. He just says, and then my best part is, Dagon, he's so powerful. He helped us defeat the Israelites, and he helped us do all this. He helped us defeat Samson, but he can't get his face out of the dirt by himself. I just don't grasp that. So they took him and said, put him back in his spot. Why? I don't know. Because like in Acts, Paul said, Paul got in trouble for saying that gods were made with hands are not gods. I agree with that. If your God needs your help, he's not a God. All right? He just doesn't. And so the next morning, he wanted to make sure that he said, in case he thought maybe it was just the wind, I need to let you know what's really going on. They rose early the next morning, and Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the ark of the God, same thing, worshiping. But then he ripped his head off, and the head of Dagon and both his hands were lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. So God, then there's also symbolism in this. This is the way that you ritualistically execute somebody in battle. You cut off his head. We're going to see this later. What does David do to Goliath? Cuts off his head. What does God do to Dagon? And what's my favorite part about this is from then on, and I'm not going to get too much into it, the people of Ashdod were afraid, and they decided that maybe we should never step on the threshold again because that's where God left those. Instead of thinking to themselves, our God's not doing very good. Why are we serving you? What are you bringing to the table? Nothing. All right? And and then it goes on from here. In verse 6, it talks about that the Lord's hand was heavy against the people. And they were and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors around Ashdod and its territories. This was the center of all worship. And the men of Ashdod saw how things were going. They said, the ark of God must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God. This is really sad. If this doesn't strike you, it's like, I don't want to hear about God. I want to stay with my own God. Just get the other God, get the real God out of here. There's no, you know what? I want to find out about your God. You know one of the tactics that people reach my Northern European crazy, nutty people that we were? We had sacred trees. And you know what the missionaries would do? Take an axe and cut down our sacred tree and say, if your God's that powerful, let him strike me down. And they didn't, they listened to the missionary. We need to understand, if your God's that powerful, follow him. But if your God is not powerful enough to even keep his hands and his head on, whose job is it to glue those back on? I'm sorry, there's little things. But it's just the whole concept of, what are you doing? I mean, your God has to have things glued back on. It doesn't make any sense. They just want to get rid of it. And so they sent and got all the lords together, and they said, let's go and bring it to Gath. Now, they were aware that the Lord had sent plagues. We saw that in verse 8. They said, we don't want those plagues to come against us. And so they sent it to Gath, and then when they had it there, then they sent the ark of the God to Ekron. But as soon as it came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, they have brought it around us, the ark of God and Israel, to kill us and our people. So they kept sending it around, and tumors broke out, and people died, and all kinds of things were happening because God's judgment was against them for not respecting him and what he was. The Philistines had tormented his people. These are not innocent people, by the way. These are people that had tormented God's people. They had served false idols. They had, basically taunted God by saying, our God Dagon beat you, and you're a worthless little god, and we're going to taunt you. And God said, this is what you're going to get for that. And so they moved it to Gath, then they moved it to Ekron. And it says in Ekron there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city. The hand of God was heavy there. They were struck with tumors, and a cry went up to heaven. Cry, get rid of this thing. So what's going to happen is they have the ark of the Lord there for 7 months. I can't imagine that 7 months of tumors and things happening to them. And so while it was there for 7 months, they called, you know what the Philistines do? They got a plan. We're going to call for the priests and the diviners and say, what should we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us what we should do. You're supposed to catch attention to that word diviner right there. That is the number one thing that God told the people. You shall not go to diviners. You shall not go to people that are going to tell you your fortune. You should not go to people that are using all kinds of witchcraft and astrological things and things like that. Diviners. This is a completely the way away from God. And he says this to them, and he shows that they're using the diviners there. And they say to him, if you send the ark away in verse 3, maybe you should not send it empty. Let's send it with a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you by what hand does not turn away. So they're going to send the ark away, but they're going to give God some things that he really wants. Let's give him something that he wants. In fact, I did not talk about this earlier, but the tumors that they got were a disease that was carried by rats. So they decided, let's give God some tumors and some rats. A lot of respect. The detestable part of the human body, the tumor, and rats, which are not supposed to be touched by or eaten or things like that. And they decide that that'll be a great guilt offering to the God of Israel. And it says, then you'll be healed. And so basically, they want to know what's going on. And he says, they missed the whole concept that if you really want to say you're sorry to God, you go to him with a guilt offering. So what they did, and this is so true today, and I want to talk about this just for a second, where people are a little bit Christian, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of what religion? I grew up, my Nordic roots. I have a little Nordic religion in me. I have a little this religion in me. I kind of mix and match. That is a common thing today. That is 100% common. And this is basically what they're doing. They're saying, we're going to use diviners, which goes against God, but it's part of our religion. We're going to pick and choose what we want. And God is saying, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. He is looking for people that say, no, we only serve the true God. The one true God. And so the diviners tell them, why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? And so they send it off. They decide they're going to take two cows that are nursing calves at this time. And then they're going to take a brand new cart that has never been used. So they're going to try to prove whether this was a coincidence or if this was God actually against them. Because anybody who's ever raised cattle knows that if they have calves, they're going to look for those calves. And then they're going to send them down the road. And they're going to send them down the road, and if those cows go towards Israel, they know that it was God of Israel that was against them. But if those cows come back to their calves, they know that it's not God against them. And so they convincing fashion, God says to them, it was me. God says, yep. So God makes those cows do the opposite of what they should naturally do. They go right to the people of Israel, and the ark is sent back to Israel. And great, everything's great, right? God's not done yet. So we see, because here's the thing I don't think I ever understood about this story. He comes back to, and it goes to a town. And you know what town it comes to? A Levite town. Levites were the priestly class. Levites were the ones that were trained in how you're supposed to handle things, how you're supposed to handle the things of God, how you're supposed to be the priest. And if you had a Levite, if you look in the book of Judges, people were fighting over a Levite. If you could get a Levite in your town or have somebody with you, that was a wonderful thing. So it goes to this town called Beth Shemesh. And the people were reaping the harvest. And when they lifted up their eyes and they saw the ark, it says in verse 13, they rejoiced. And they set up a great stone was there. And they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And you say, that seems nice. You're not supposed to offer cows to a burnt offering to the Lord. It's supposed to be male only. In other words, they're just like, hey, we'll make up our own religion. That whole thing about God telling us what to do, we'll just do our own thing. The other thing about a Levite, you know what you're supposed to do with the Ark of the Covenant? The one thing the Indiana Jones thing does get right is you're not supposed to look inside of it, and you're always supposed to cover it. So what did they do? They put it on a rock so everybody could see. And then they took cows, which were not supposed to be killed. They were supposed to only kill male cattle. They were supposed to only do that. And so they did this whole thing, and they knew better. And this could tell you the state of what was going on with the people of Israel at this time. It says, verse 19, and he struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. And then the men of Beth Shemesh said, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God, and to whom shall he go up away from us? So he is intending, God is saying to them, you have me to fear, not the Philistines. You need to start treating God the way you're supposed to. So they sent messengers. It went to a different town, Kiriath Jearim, and the people there took it. And now we're going to move to chapter 7. And we're going to find out what God really wants. And I want you to identify what doesn't appear in this chapter. There'll be a quiz later. So it says, from the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. And Samuel said to the house, guess who else wasn't involved in the last few chapters? Nobody was asking Samuel, what should we do? Nobody was calling for the priest. Nobody was calling for the one that God had called. They're sending out Hophni and Phinehas. They're thinking, we'll just do it our own way. God's not that big a deal about us touching the ark and all that. Okay? So finally, Samuel said to them, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Asherah from among you and direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord. So something happened during this time period. You see, in chapter 6, it said the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. In other words, the people were sad because God had judged them. Nobody said, what should I do? How do I repent? And David, we're going to see, David got some punishments. David got some slapdowns from God. But you know what David always did, the way he was a man after God's own heart? He went to God and said, I repent, I deserve it, change me, O God. Create in me a clean heart. So the judgment of God is not meant to just make you sad, it's meant to drive you to him. Because that's what he wants you to do. And so you see in verse 2, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. You can just change the word there? After the Lord. They're going after him. They want to see what God wants of them. And so then, verse 4, they accept the challenge. They put away the male and the female gods. I've talked about this before, but all of the religions around this time, the Baals and the Asheroth, are basically fertility or sex gods. And they're not to be seen. I've seen pictures of them. You don't want to. But basically, that's what they are. Because they're fertility gods. And he said, put away these gods and serve only God. And then Samuel said, gather all of Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord and fasted on that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. So to formalize their agreement, they all gathered together at Mizpah. This is 5 miles north of Jerusalem. The center of all tribal stuff during the time of Judges. Remember, the Philistines were over them at this time. And they had a time of prayer, fasting, and confession of sins. They say, we have sinned. This is the first time anybody is saying, we have sinned. Oh Lord, forgive us, help us. Everybody else is coming up with their own plans. And they drew water and they poured it out before the Lord. This is the only time we see this in the Bible. Basically saying, this water, which is life-giving, we'd rather pour this out because we want the life-giving of God. They have turned their hearts towards God. So the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered. And they're not happy because what happens when you're conquering a world or you're conquering a nation, you don't want them gathering together because a lot of times they might start thinking, let's get the band back together and start marching. Let's get our forces back. And so the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. Okay? What happened the last time they were afraid of the Philistines? They took their good luck charm. They thought, we'll just throw the Ark of the Covenant. Our priests are, they're leches. I mean, they're bad people. And we're not following after God, but that Ark of the Covenant will do it. This time, they said to Samuel, pray for us. Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. They're not doing it their way anymore. They're not using they're not using the Ark of the Covenant. They're not using this. They are actually following God. And when they cry out to God, they ask for him to intercede and say, oh, Samuel, intercede for us to God that he may deliver us. We have realized that we don't have to fear the Philistines as much as we fear God. And if we fear God, we don't have to fear the Philistines. Because if you're following after God, there's nothing that you have to fear in this world. Are there going to be troubles in this world? Yes, but God is greater than all of them. There's nothing that can stop them. And they finally realize it. It took these chapters. They finally get to it. It says in verse 9, so Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Just so you know, the Philistines are marching in as an army during this time. So what's Samuel's plan? Let's have a church service. Essentially what he's doing. Because he's crying out to God. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel. And the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. So in other words, he's about to do the offering, the burnt offering, and the Philistines are coming in. You can just see the tension. And all of a sudden, the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as below Bethkar. This is the deliverance. You see, the Philistines heard the thunder shake, and they knew that the God of heaven was there. It wasn't the cry of the people. It was God himself saying, and they know the Philistines are smart enough at this time, we're in trouble. He took our Dagon God and really made a mess out of him. All right? And now he's going to make a mess out of us. They heard the thunder. And what did the people of Israel have to do? Trust in God. Trust in God. The power of God to deliver them. It wasn't that they had to do the right ritual or something. It was to call it to God. And so then Samuel took a stone and set it up before Mizpah and Shen and called its name Ebenezer, for he said, till now the Lord has helped us. You might remember that there was another Ebenezer at the beginning of this story. You see, they encamped at Ebenezer when they weren't following after God. And they call the stone Ebenezer in verse 12 when they're following after God. I wanted to name the sermon Two Ebenezers, but I thought it would be too weird. But basically the concept is the Lord has helped us. In the first Ebenezer, they're like, yeah, we'll take the Philistines on. We'll just go get our Ark of the Covenant. We'll take it. The second Ebenezer is like, God, you do it. It's all you. If I'm going to have anything in this world, it's because you're going to do it for me. We come before you and we raise the song, that we raise our Ebenezer. That's a song. And so they raise it up to him. And they have total victory. It says the Philistines are going to never again enter the territory of Israel during this time. The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines through the whole time of Samuel. Basically, you have to understand, the Philistines are recorded in all kinds of other writings saying nobody messes with them. But the Israelites got to the stage that, first of all, they took all the land back from them that they had taken from the Israelites. There was peace between Israel and the Amorites. You're like, where did they come from? The Amorites were afraid of the Israelites because of God. They didn't have to fight them. They're like, we know you're God. We want to be at peace with you. And so this whole thing, and he's a judge for the rest of the time. But I want you to understand, the whole Ark covenant, do you notice that the Ark is not present here when they win? It just struck me as I was reading through this week. It wasn't the Ark. It was the God that comes from the Ark. Okay, it's the God. It's not the Ark itself. It is God. If God would have said, go get the Ark, then they need to go get the Ark. When they ran around Jericho, they used the Ark. When they marched through the desert, they used the Ark. But it's not something to be played with, the power of God. And I think that that's important for us to understand as Christians today. We need to follow what God calls us to do. We need to humble ourselves before him, trust in him that he can raise us up, that he can defeat the enemies that come against us. And he can do this because of his power, not because of our system, not because of our mixture of our religion with other religions, not because of using good luck charms or things like that, but we follow after the power of God, who is the all-encompassing power over every power in the world. Why don't you stand with me today? If you're here today and you've never accepted Christ, Christ died on the cross because on our own we are not worthy. When I stand before God someday, I am worthy of judgment. Me personally, that's all I'm worthy of without Christ. You notice everything in the Old Testament kind of points to the perfection. They say, Samuel, intercede for us. Samuel, intercede. You know who intercedes for us right now? Jesus Christ. He intercedes for us. When we're in trouble, we go to Jesus and we say, intercede for us. We need help. We need to be forgiven. We need to be cleansed. And if you're here today and you want to become a Christian, come and talk to one of our prayer ministers. But for everybody else that's here, whatever battle you're facing right now, whether it's a sickness, whether it's a financial thing, whether it's a family issue, whether it's finding a job, it could be anything. God is powerful enough and never has any areas that he can't handle. He everywhere. So if you need someone to pray with you today and intercede for you, come and talk to one of our prayer ministers. We'd love to pray for you today. Lord, we come before you today knowing that you are the great and mighty God, knowing that you are the one God that has no barriers, no boundaries. You bow down to no one, others bow down to you, God. And we just thank you for this, God, your blessing. And Lord, help us this week to know that we serve the God that thunders in the heavens, rules the earth, and has all-encompassing power over the evil one, God. Let us not rely on ourselves. Let us not rely on second rate. Let us rely completely on you. In the name of Jesus, amen.